Hey, welcome everybody. It's me, GrimGriz. If you're aware of the corner as a talk show circuit, then you've probably already seen this man, as he's recently been on PBK's Homeroom, Grail Country, and I caught you on just chatting with Jacob for a little bit, but we're gonna pretend none of that was said because I didn't catch most of it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Raj.
Howdy.
For those not familiar, would you like to have them know you as?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Raj. I am part of Paul's local estuaries, so I go to those pretty frequently. The one at Livingstone's, and then there's a kind of a sister estuary that Paul doesn't attend. It's run by Josiah, if you guys know Josiah. And yeah, I just finished up my degree or my credential to become a elementary school teacher, and I studied religion in college. So I received a bachelor's and a master's in religious studies, and then got into teaching through just substituting and liking the work. And yeah, and I've more recently started to take my faith more seriously. I didn't always look like this. I started wearing the turban and keeping my hair, which are articles of the Sikh faith. And I started keeping this look about 6 months ago. I've always been very interested in my religion. There was never a point where I didn't consider myself to be a Sikh. And, but there was definitely a point in college when I was doing religious studies where I was trying to take other religions as seriously as possible and trying to figure out what's going on there. And am I in the right one?
Right?
Yeah.
If you don't come up in one, then it's like, should I even be in one at all? And
Right.
so, like, you did that, but like from within one that you grew up in. So that makes sense. This estuary thing, in case people aren't aware, is basically a discussion group for where the Christian pure holy water can mix with the salt water of the rest of the world, and that's the happens in estuaries geographically and now metaphorically through this project that launched basically via PBK in response to everyone getting all flummoxed about Jordan Peterson and looking for people to talk to about it. Is that how you found Paul and this corner, or?
Yeah, so I ran into Paul's videos as a consequence of the algos recommending it to me because I was watching a lot of Peterson content. The One second, let me close this door. There's this rooster around here, and he's just always crowing, and it doesn't matter what time of day it is. So 1 second.
We're giving Raj a minute to deal with the cock somehow.
My apologies.
Sometimes cocks need to be dealt with, man. It's fine.
Yeah, so watching a lot of Peterson content, found Paul that way. And I was actually living in Long Beach at the time, working on my master's. But then I found out he's in Sacramento. I was like, oh, whoa, because I was born in Sacramento. I did not grow up here. Most of my family lives in Sacramento. My grandmother was living on her own, and she was, 84, 85 years old. And so someone needed to be with her. I came in and moved in with her. And then I found out Paul's church is 7 minutes away from my house. It's really close. And I had to go. And I made it there before they rebranded to Estuary. So the first time I was there, it was still a Jordan Peterson meetup. But then lockdown happened, and then there weren't meetings for a long time. There were still a couple of here and there clandestine meetings, but not big ones.
Yeah, the lockdown happening really brought me deeper into the corner because, like, first of all, I understood that they were isolating everyone the way I had isolated myself and the harm that that was going to do to the general population. And then also the whole, why aren't these Christians freaking out about the mark of the beast
Right.
curiosity with the buy or sell thing? How so? Did you stick with the videos and then add on the estuary, or was it like to the extent that
Yeah,
Paul is the corner? Were you in
I
there?
watch a good chunk of Paul's videos. I didn't really branch out too much into the other parts of this corner. I got into the Discord kind of early, but kind of discombobulating. I'm not really good at Discord. It's a little difficult to
It is
jump
what
in.
its name says, I think. So that makes sense.
And then, yeah, I don't keep up with Paul's videos as much as I used to, but there was a period where I was watching every single one every single day. But now I'll usually watch one that catches my eye. Usually, I'm more keen to watch the stuff related to Peterson. Although I am a fan of church politics stuff, and when he gets into the nitty gritty of the institution related
Hmm.
content, because I've always been fascinated in. I noticed there was stuff wrong with our institutions when I got to college because the administrative states that all colleges have become, where the people who have the most power tend to be middle administrators, even at a small college. Me and my friends were like, this doesn't really make sense. And now all the kids who complain about stuff have an outside voice because it's an administrator's job to basically act like customer service reps for a lot of the students.
It became
And
interesting. Like higher education sort of became like you weren't normal if you didn't get one.
yeah,
And that I think really decreased the value of what it became a thing they were selling rather than what they were helping people become.
yeah, there's a aspect of every college in the country essentially became a degree mill. Usually that would be the reputation of a few colleges, but that is kind of the standard these days. And then also with things like federal loans, colleges were able to. There are colleges where they just have it in their policy to increase tuition by a certain percentage every year.
Hmm.
And there are places. I think we probably hit the peak of that a few years ago. I think there are colleges rethinking that approach now, but $70,000 a year is absurd. No one should be paying that amount of money for a college degree, and especially now with things like YouTube and these sort of alternative ways to get an education, people are opting out, especially men. But you don't get that little piece of paper that you need for employers. So
Your
that's the issue.
obedience certificate almost.
Exactly. Yep.
So, due to the nature of a lot of these channels, I've been exposed to a lot of your Grail Country talk was a lot of your personal history with the religion and such.
Mhm.
Um, I recall you saying that the woke thing landed while you were in college, like the transition became noticeable from.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it necessarily landed because it's been a buildup for a long time, but it exploded while we were there. And um, there were several instances where people were calling on administration. A lot of the kids who are into this, what we can call woke, they really weaponize the administration, and they would go to these administrators to get students in trouble if they didn't like the types of things they were saying. And I am friends with a guy named Ethan, and he was very outspoken. He's a very disagreeable person. And when he saw all of the lies and sort of incorrect thinking around things. When I say incorrect thinking, yeah, that doesn't sound great. I saw you that reaction.
Logic full of fallacies?
Yes, there we go. Illogical thinking. Then he would call it out, and that would piss people off. And there were several times where they tried to use the administration against him. Luckily, most of the administration would actually take the time to listen to him, and he had a strong relationships with a couple of professors. And so nothing too major ever happened to him, but he was cast kind of as this villain on campus. Kids thought he was racist, sexist. I don't think homophobic ever got slammed at him, but I mean, he was hanging out. There was a good group of us, and he's half Cuban, but that didn't matter to anybody. And he was mostly hanging out with not white people, POCs, people of color, as we were labeled on campus. And it was just funny seeing a group of all white kids call this guy who's hanging out with us not white kids a racist. It's like
They jumped the shark around here, folks. Yeah.
And then the rape culture stuff was really big while we were in
The
college.
what, sir?
Rape culture?
We didn't have that when I was that age. I don't think.
So rape culture is it's related to patriarchy stuff. And it's just essentially the idea that, you know, all of those situations that it was prevalent in the news 5-6 years ago, men being falsely accused of rape and stuff like that. Do you remember this?
I saw the Me Too stuff, but I hadn't heard it.
Yeah, so this precedes Me Too. This is kind of where Me Too comes out of. I mean, there's definitely things that needed to be addressed in our society, and some people needed to get in trouble.
And they still do, as far
yes.
as I can tell. Half of them. Yeah.
But there is this notion where this is where you demonize the male gaze, so men aren't supposed to look at you with any kind of lustful or romantic feeling. It doesn't matter how clothed your body is, right? If any man looks at you in a way that you don't want them to, that's a symptom of rape culture. If two people engage in some sort of sexual relationship, or there's just like a sexual act that occurs between the two of them, a woman can withdraw her consent at any point afterwards. Or if both people are intoxicated, the onus is still on the man to, like, the idea is you can't give consent while you're intoxicated, but that only applied sort of one way. And then they would use Title IX as a way to discipline students on campus. And Title IX was established to make sure there's parity between the genders when it came to sports-related things. That's what it was initially designed for. But eventually it became kind of like this extrajudicial court system within the colleges, where you could, it wouldn't lead to criminal charges necessarily, but you could suspend somebody on, or you could expel somebody from a college with what in a criminal court would be considered hearsay or conjecture, essentially. And so this was happening to, I mean, this was just a thing that was happening in
like that part of the administration became weaponized.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you think you leaning harder into your religion has, like, the society took that turn, had anything to do with that?
Oh yeah, that's definitely part of it. Especially because it was also the gender stuff was going on. So I saw people getting into labeling themselves as non-binary, trans, all these different gender labels, and I'm not one to dismiss it all out of turn, and I certainly did it when I was there, but I did notice, just my personal experience, that the students who leaned into that stuff the heaviest, that their mental health like precipitously was falling apart. There is one girl I remember, like I saw this transformation happen with several girls where they would come in, they were very feminine, very bright, shining women. And from my perspective, it was almost like they ruined themselves. Like one girl really leaned into getting as fat as possible and shaving her head and then taking photographs of herself naked, because that was a way to stick it to the man. And I could not understand what was happening. She's talked about having an eating disorder and how she felt oppressed by the beauty standards when she was younger. And I remember her freshman year, she was a gorgeous girl. But then her answer to that was, instead of caring about those things so much, was to try and destroy those things by abusing her body. She became unhealthily overweight. She went from being maybe a little too skinny to being morbidly obese on purpose.
It feels, I'm like the scene from Fight Club where Norton beats the crap out of Leto. It's coming to mind. And like at the end, he's like, I wanted to destroy something beautiful. It's like,
yeah.
So are you concerned about going into education with like what's going on? It seems like you're walking into a minefield of sorts.
Well, originally I wanted to be more a part of, as I was studying, working on my master's, the thought was, maybe I'd like to be a professor or something like that. But I didn't want to deal with all that stuff. And also I wanted to have a more active role in the world. And there's a real sense in where professors are, academics oftentimes will just kind of go get, like they're doing something very obscure for most of their life. And even though that can be fruitful and can give us important insights, I'm just more extroverted than that, I think. And I'm going to be in elementary schools. And so I'm not as concerned about some of this stuff, although there are the news stories where, people are teaching third graders, fourth graders about the gender unicorn.
Yeah, you don't expect you're going to have to do that?
I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not going to teach kids about the gender unicorn. Like, I'm just not going to. And so whether that means I'm not going to be a teacher, or it means I'm going to make a stink about it, I'm going to have to do that. And so far, from my experience in the two districts that I've worked at in the Sacramento area, it hasn't been being pushed too hard. The most I've seen is there's a fifth grade teacher at one of the schools that I've been at who refers to herself with, rather than Miss or Mrs., she's Mix, MX. And that's about the extent to that I've seen. And, it's cool. The kids are like, a kid will make a joke. I'll say something like, all the girls raise your hand. A boy will raise their hand. And the whole class turns to him and goes, you're not a girl. And it's like, yeah, they get it.
The programming hasn't got to them yet.
Yeah. And I do think that some of that stuff is, most of my work experiences has been in Title I schools, which are schools in the low socioeconomic areas that receive federal funding. And a lot of this gender stuff, I'm pretty sure if it's happening, it's probably happening in more affluent areas.
I wonder why. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, there's a lot of Hispanic people in the schools that I've been teaching at, and I don't think they're gonna stand for this stuff.
It's fascinating to me, particularly like I caught an article of the Michigan Muslims being the ones that stood up against it, and
Yep.
that Christianity is a real problem for Christianity, as far as I'm concerned, because when the kids wake up to the actual harm that being indoctrinated as woke has done them, they're gonna resent those that didn't, who could have stood up and didn't, I think. So that you're going into it willing to go down to not do it is noble, as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
But like, based on the stories you told on Grail Country from your religion, I mean, it's not like you're being burnt with hot sands until you die, right?
Right. There is most of these schools, there's a lot of immigrant populations, and I just don't think that the immigrant populations are going to deal with this. There's a lot of fresh Vietnamese people, lots of Hmong students, and increasingly there's Afghani students. I saw the uptick after we pulled out of Afghanistan and the refugees who came over, but I saw that reflected in my local community, and it's going to be really hard for the parents here to buy into that stuff. And it's just, most of it's just not on their radar whatsoever right now, because why would it be? They're trying to, they're moving to a new country and trying to build a life. It's not, it's not their concern.
I like to think that the smarter kids will see it as a game to, like, that's the way the system, this is what you need to say to game the system. And they might be dishonest when they play along, but like they'll be playing along because they to win the game, not because they believe it. And then like the less critically thinking among them will probably get swept up into it. But
I was in a high school for about a year as a long-term substitute, and I had one student. She was she wanted people to use he, him pronouns, and this girl was she would correct people. She wasn't tyrannical about it like I've seen other people be, especially back in college. But this is also she was very open about the trauma that she had in her life, and she was a victim of sexual abuse from a very young age. And I could understand why you wouldn't necessarily want to identify with being as a woman, because that status put on you made you incredibly vulnerable. But I never called her he, him. I just used her name. And there's ways around this sort of thing. And
there has to be.
One of my friends,
there has to be a way around it, because
one of my friends,
you can't let people put pronouns in your mouth. The same way you can't let them put other things in your mouth. You don't.
There's a girl in college, and she just got into the habit of referring to everybody as they, them. I'm not a big fan of that strategy, but it is kind of a way to play the game, but not by their rules.
Mine is that if anybody is in that situation, my preferred pronouns are Zod. So go ahead. But I think that might be playing along too much, actually, but it's worth it just for the Zod reference to me. I'd like to poke around at your religion a little bit because I've heard
Yep.
quite a bit. First, is it so that is it such a thing that the gurus are the same dude reincarnated, or am I off on that?
So they definitely have distinct personalities, but there's this notion that there's a light within one that gets transferred to the next one. And so they're definitely not reincarnated because the first the first guru in his lifetime confirms the second person. So it's not like a Dalai Lama situation, right? It's not the guy dies and then you have to go find him somewhere else.
And
It's
then when you
the
find
guru,
him, you can tell it's him because he picks the right toys. I think
right?
that's how it
It's
works.
not that kind of situation. There's Guru Nanak, and he had a community that started to gather around him, and he started kind of testing people, keeping an eye out for who's going to be, who could be his successor. And then the person who um, rose to the occasion was chosen, and this was a man named Pai Lerna. And then he was deemed Angad, and he became Guru Angad, and Angad means limb. And so he's like, and there is an obedience thing here. Okay, so one of the things about Angad is that he was obedient to Nanak because Nanak is obedient to the divine will. And so there's these series of tests that happen, and the final test is in the tradition is they're walking through the woods and Guru Nanak throws silver coins. A bunch of the people fail the test because they grab the silver coins and run out of the forest. And he throws gold coins. A bunch of people fail the test, they grab the coins, run out of the forest. And then they come up to a body. And there's only like 4 people left, and there's a body underneath a cloth. And you can't see that it's a body. You can't actually see the physical body, but from the outline, it looks like there's a body underneath. And he goes, "All right, guys, eat the body." And then most of them were like, "What?" And then they run away because they're like, "You're crazy." And then Guru Angad Dev Ji, or he goes, his only response is, "Guruji, do you want me to start from the head or from the feet?" And Guru Nanak tells him to start from, I think, the feet. And then he lifts up the cloth, and it's not a body; it's a feast of sweets and goodies. But it's this willingness to follow the divine, even to the point of complete absurdity, where everyone will think you're a crazy monster, like psycho person for doing it, to the point where you're gonna cannibalize somebody because you trust the divine more than you trust yourself or society, frankly.
And you trust that the divine is in the guru.
Yeah, that too.
That would be the hard. Like trusting the divine's not so hard for me. Trusting that saying that through that guy, that's
Right.
a little bit more.
Yes.
So the succession thing, is it ongoing? Is there one now? Is he keeping an eye out? Or?
No, so the succession carries out through 10 men. So there's the 10th guru is the final individual man who's a guru. But then he gives the guruship over to the scripture, so the Guru Granth Sahib, and in turn he establishes what's called the Khalsa Panth, and that means Khalsa means something like pure, Panth means group, path, and the Khalsa Panth is supposed to be an army. And so that's one of the reasons why they carry weaponry, the Kirpan. Most people nowadays, it's a little dagger. Back when it was first started, it was like a 30-foot long sword. And the establishment of the Khalsa starts with, it's another one of these stories of trusting the Guru, where he comes out of a tent, he has a sword in his hand, and he goes, My blade hungers for blood today, but not the blood of the Mughals who they were engaged with conflict with at the time. And he says, it's hungry for the blood of my Sikhs. And so who's going to feed my blade? And no one answers. Eventually, someone answers. I think their first one, his name is Himmat, which means something like fortitude, courage, strength. And he stands up. He walks into the tent with the guru, and blood starts coming out of the tent. And he asks this from 4 more people. So there's a total of 5 men who give their heads, and they go into the tent, and blood streams out every time. And then they come out of the tent in saffron robes, and they're considered the Panj Yade, the 5 beloved ones. And he says, this is the Khalsa when I am gone. The Khalsa is my new body, essentially. And then he does something. I think this part is the real miracle, because there's historical. So the way this story is told traditionally is that these guys get their heads chopped off and then they are reattached through a miracle, right? But we have historical documentation that Guru Sahib probably had some goats in the tent, and that he killed the goats to make, because the point's not the miracle. The point is the sacrifice that the men are willing to make. And so the crowd just sees the blood coming out, right? They don't know what's happening inside the tent. So for all intents and purposes, they gave their heads to him. But the real miracle is that when these 5 men are standing before him, Guru Gobind Singh kneels down and has them initiate him into the Khalsa. So what you see in Sikhi over and over again is the importance of this teacher-student relationship, where the student is entirely obedient to the teacher, but then eventually the teacher, when the time is right, is able to recognize the student as the new teacher or as the new master, to the point where he does it with the community itself. He says, you guys are, basically, it's like, you guys are grown up and you can handle this on your own
now. I asked you about the reincarnation thing. What's the cosmology in your religion? Is there afterlife? Contentious.
Yeah, like many religious things. So there's references to reincarnation, heaven and hell realms inside the scripture. Most people would probably say that there is reincarnation in terms of cosmology, and that when you die, but it's very different from Buddhist or Hindu reincarnation. In Sikhi, the human life is considered the best life, which is similar to some Hinduisms and Buddhism, but you don't have this thing where you level up one level or level down one level. So it's like, I was a pretty good guy, so maybe I'm born again as a human being, but a little bit higher in the caste system. Or I was a pretty good guy, maybe I'll born into heavenly realm level 1 instead of Earth. Rather, there's this notion that you either live so well, or the idea is you come to know the divine and merge with the divine in your lifetime, and then you will be merged with the divine in the afterlife, or you just have to go through the whole cycle of reincarnation again of 186,000 lifetimes. Not as a human being, but as all these other different things.
100.
But
where does that come from? 186,000 seems a very specific number.
It's just a number. It's, some people say it's correlated to the amount of species on the planet. this is one of the reasons why I tend to think that the scripture is actually a little bit more ambiguous about this, because there are lines in Gurbani where it says we don't know what happens after death. And this would be in line with the opening scripture, which actually gives a criticism to the other religions for trying to be like, there's this point where it's criticizing other religions for having a holy day of the week, to be like, that's the day when creation was made, creation happened. So a little bit of jabbing at the Abrahamic faiths there. And it's like, we don't know. No one knows when. You can't give me the exact date when creation was created. And so some people, the challenge is most people would probably say reincarnation is what's happening. There is a very reasonable argument to be made that we don't know. And it's really not kind of the point. It's like,
because the point is to do it while you're here anyway. So what happens after doesn't matter as much.
Yeah. And it's also, if you're just doing the stuff God wants you to do for heaven, like, you're just turning it into a transactional relationship anyway. Like, it's idolatrous anyway.
It's like, save your soul. Why?
Yeah.
Speaking of which, what about demons and the adversary and the less than divine unseen forces? Do they play a role?
So Gurbani does talk about the gods existing. There is this notion that they exist, and there are some references to being demons or being reincarnated as a demon. But one of the arguments from the people who think that Gurbani is very psychological in a lot of ways. And so there's kind of this notion that you're constantly being reincarnated in this life. And I'm hungry. So when I'm hungry, my mind has died and been reborn as the mind of a hungry person. Or I'm feeling lustful, and my mind has died and has been reborn as a lustful person. And the goal, in some sense, is to always keep your center, so that you're not constantly dying and being reborn. And so there are stories of Guru Nanak running into something like a demon or the personification of death itself. But and there are stories of, spiritual leaders in the tradition who do something akin to exorcism, but it's not. No one who I know in my day-to-day life has ever emphasized those points to me or even talked to me about it. And it's not a big part of the scripture by any means. And so maybe, like, I'm interested in all of this egregore talk that's happening in this corner. I find it very interesting. Whether these entities exist out there, I'm still agnostic about that. Maybe they do, maybe they don't.
So the chief adversary of the spiritual life is what we would call the fallen nature. What'd you say?
Yeah, it's called home, and that means I, me. That's the big problem. It's getting over your I, me. And so,
I completely misunderstood it then. Like, I caught kind of that bit when you were on with Federecci, but I thought it was a good thing that you were my homie. So
no, so I, me is not about you and me. Like we're trapped in I, me, all the time. I, me. It's when it gets translated as ego most of the time. So like your narrow consciousness where you're thinking about just yourself in this moment is the best way I can describe it. You know, Peterson, he talks about he makes reference to that Simpsons situation where Homer, the kids are like, or Marge and the kids are saying something to Homer, where like, don't do this, and he's pouring vodka into a jar of mayonnaise. And he's like, no, that's a problem for future Homer. And he drinks it and he passes out immediately.
Mhm.
And it's like, that's how it, as far as I'm concerned, like that total disregard for other people,
Even your future
or
self.
even your,
Right.
yeah, because your future self is somebody else. And so, like the notion
Right. Me
that
and
something,
past me are going to have words. So I know what you mean about that. Yeah.
so there's this notion of finding yourself in the other, and that ultimate other is the divine. And so there's even a lot of emphasis in Gurbani on not becoming attached to the other people in your life. And this was a part that confused me for a while, and I needed to get
Especially
some
given with your
guidance
reason for
from.
not going through the portal.
This is something I needed guidance for and spiritual counsel from the person who's essentially mentoring me within the tradition at my local temple. And he's like, so think about your dog. Every time your dog sees you, she's ecstatic that you're around, right? It's like, yeah. But your dog doesn't sit around thinking about you all day. She's happy when you're here, but like she's got to do her own stuff when she's on her own. I was like, okay. So it's not this notion of don't care about other people, but it's there's a in Gurbani it's something like there is a light in all, and that light is you. And so that thing that you're supposed to fall in love with everybody is the divine. And so you're always, if you're getting caught up in, say, a specific person with all their eccentricities and idiosyncrasies, yeah, that's really special, but don't love people in the way that's gonna hold them back. Like, don't love people despite their flaws, not because of their flaws, right?
Which, as we know from Good Will Hunting, is what's actually the most lovable about people. It's like, I like the way she farted in her sleep. You know?
Well, is that a flaw? Like that's a natural thing about her body, right?
But yeah, it's the idiosyncrasy. It's like it's what makes the things that make you not like everybody else. Your synchronicities, whatever. That's what differentiates you, and that's what I think people. That's what the not to get attached to is what you're saying.
So this is I've read a lot of Buddhist thinking, and there's like in Buddhism, from my understanding, it seems to be a little bit more fatalistic. Like you're not supposed to sort of there's almost like this washing away of individuality or the specific person. But there's a story when the third guru his daughter comes of age where it's time for her to get married, and his wife is looking at everyone in the village, and she's like, oh, how about someone like Pai Lena or Pai Jeta? And Guru Amar Das, he's one of he's a really cool, he's a really interesting incarnation of the Guru, or like very interesting example of the Guruship, because he becomes the Guru when he's like in his 60s, so he's a really old man. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of his contributions to the scripture are very harsh. He just tells like it is. Very like kind of mean and curmudgeonly in a lot of ways. But yeah, so his wife is looking at all the people and she goes, how about someone like Pai Jeta? And Guru Amar Das Ji looks at her and goes, well, how about Pai Jeta? There's no one like him. He's the only one like him. And she's like, okay, because she has her reservations because he comes kind of from a low status family, and it's like, even if your husband is the guru, as a mom, you're still going to be concerned about the status of your
Mhm.
partner. um, so there is like this, like, even though it's very difficult and kind of hard, paradoxical in a lot of ways, and I'm still trying to understand a lot of this stuff, but there is an appreciation for the individual person as something unique. And that's one of the reasons why we're supposed to keep our hair. Like, it does have this effect of making us all, giving us a similar look, but it's also, once you're looking at, when you notice everyone keeping their hair, it's like, oh, everyone's very different when it comes to that, especially with men. Like, some people, this is maybe all the facial hair they'll ever grow, where they have like this much mustache. Like, this thing has gotten way longer than I thought it ever would. Like my mustache, I did not think my mustache would grow long. Um, some people have big, thick beards, bushy beards. I tend to grow long hairs, and so there is this simultaneous. Like, I think the home is kind of the same in everybody because it's this thing that's reactive and narrow, and it goes against you in a lot of ways because it's that thing that's constantly dying and being reborn based off of the situation.
Man, I really liked it the other way I saw it though. That like because the thing with Chat GPT and Dan just came out, and like okay, so what happened with that is somebody figured out if they asked Chat GPT to LARP as a guy
Mhm.
called Dan, which stood for Do Anything Now, it could violate all the restrictions that they had put on Chat GPT in its answers,
Hmm.
which means a lot of things because it's violating all the restrictions put on it. And like that, the difference between those two landed as the I me, like because I had just caught that bit with you on Jacob, and it was like once that's created, then the divine can exist between the two, even within the one entity.
So there's this one area in the scripture in Guru Granth Sahib Ji where it goes into more detail about home, and one of the things about it is it says something along the lines of home is a vicious disease, but it is also its own cure. And I'm not quite sure what to make of that. And it's like home is kind of like your individual will. It's what there are these constraints put on us, right, through our genetics, social conditioning, our upbringing, and that stuff is kind of your home. It's when you break free of that and you connect with the divine, because when you're connected with the divine, it's like you don't care about right and wrong when you're connected to the divine in a sense, because it's like most of the time, because like right and wrong is what's defined as in our culture and in our society. Like there is this element of relativism that Gurbani points out, where don't be concerned with Bop and Born. That means don't be concerned with sin or vice. Just do the things that you're supposed to do out of love for the divine, right? Um, but then it comes when you're able to do that, then you're invited to join the Khalsa, which has all these strictures and these disciplines and these rules that you're supposed to follow. But that's because you've signed up for the army. But until you just because then there are certain things where it's like, you got to make sure that the reason you're fighting is for defense or for the defeat of tyrants, right? Those are really the only times you should be fighting. Um, but there is this until you kind of get to that point, it's can you trust, can you follow that divinity through, can you love it more than anything else? Can you love it more than the people in your family? Can you love it more than your friends? Can you love it more than other people's perceptions of you? Can you love it more than yourself?
I hope
Right?
so, because even the Christians have that task as well.
Yeah.
So it's not.
I mean, it's the hardest thing in the world.
Okay, I got one more religious question, and then we can just chat for a minute or two. The headgear. Does it mean something if you show up in a yellow hat, like the way roses mean something? Like you're here being friendly, so you wear the yellow one, and you wear different colors for different things, or is it just I happen to have this color and it's clean?
More so that there are people who are there are parts of the community who more hardline, I guess you could say, and they will say things like you should only wear blue, orange, and yellow because those are kind of like the traditional colors. But you know, I've seen guys in camo bobs. I've seen guys in flannel ones. But mostly it's you know, what you got and what goes with your outfit type of thing.
Among the hardline, are there distinctions for when to wear what colors, or is it just those three and you're fine?
Not that I know of. The predominant colors would be blue and orange, and if you're going to be doing something more active, you might wear blue because that tends to be the color of the that color is more associated with the martial aspects, and then the orange is more related to
community,
everyday. Yeah, spirituality. I guess I don't really know how to parse it out, but I don't think there could be. You'd have to ask one of those hardliners, but I think
I didn't want to like have a situation where like yellow means we're making fun of you and me not ask about it, you know? So
no, yeah. Yeah, mostly it's like their traditional colors, and then, but some people get really like that. When I was talking to Jacob, I had a bright pink one on, right? But that's just fashion.
So this little corner showing up on people's YouTube channels, what's going on with that, man?
I don't know. I was supposed to have that conversation with Paul a long time ago. We've been like trying to schedule that thing for a couple of years, it feels like. But it definitely, like, it was supposed to happen when it happened, because I think me doing this thing was supposed to be a part of it before I finally got onto the channel, and it seemed like God wouldn't let me get to that open up that level until I did this. But yeah, I like these conversations. I like what's going on here. There's over at Grill Country. I'd never seen any of the Grill Country videos before, but there was a great talk over there, and checking out more of their content now. And because I think that there's something to, I do think that mystical experience is the ground of all the religions, and Peterson likes to, like, Peterson kind of points to that, but he always points to it through psychedelics, and those things happen without psychedelics, Peterson. So I mean, I did mess with psychedelics back in college, but
tell me about the portal. Mainly because well, why don't you recap the portal story for the people who didn't see you over on Grill Country real quick, and then I'll ask you some questions about it.
So the course of the trip was, it climaxed with the peak experience, which is I entered into this place which was very gray and shimmery, and I called it the womb of humanity. Although in some of my poetry that I was writing at the time, I did refer to it as the pool of types. So kind of like this place where archetypes are born, I think. And then it was very ill-defined, gray, shimmery, and I didn't feel like my body was there, or even that I was positioned in it in any way. It was almost like I was a part of it. And then there was this portal, this light, darkness. It's hard. At one point it was light, at one point it was dark. I was convinced that if I went through it, I would be born as another person. But I have to be like, I was convinced that if I went through it, I would be emerging out of a woman's uterus as a baby.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I was like, oh.
And did that have any appeal? Because like you said in the story, you said the reason you didn't was because of your attachment to members of your family. So
yeah,
that had some allure for you at the time.
Yeah, I think there was a part of me trying to escape from myself, right? Like that's something that a lot of us go through pretty consistently, trying to escape from ourselves. But yeah, you got to come home and you got to be who you are, no matter how much you want to like, try and not do that. What is it? The your destiny is often found on your road. Your destiny is often found on the road you took to avoid your destiny, right?
Mm-hmm. It's gonna find you. There's things you can't run from. So do you think there's something here, or are we just full of ourselves?
I mean, I think life is good. I think creation is good. I think that there is a way in which we can recognize that there are a bunch of horrors here, but we can do our part to make it a little bit better while we're alive. Hopefully a lot better. But if you had asked me a couple of years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, well, yeah, we're probably deluding ourselves. But like it's just, what does Peterson say? It's mayhem all the way around. But I've always had an optimism and an idealism to me, and I think that those things can be manifested in our planet, in our local communities. And sometimes we get caught up in seeing how bad this stuff is up the ladder.
Such as?
Well, you know, the general corruption, people who want to depopulate the planet, like the kids who are mutilating their bodies, right? All of this stuff is horrifying, not good. And dare I say bad and evil. But there's always, so at the local estuary, at the North Sacramento estuary, the one that Josiah runs, we were having this talk about, or this conversation around, can wisdom be passed on to the next generation, or do you just have to like make your mistakes? And I do think that wisdom can be passed on, but you're not going to get fresh wisdom without a bunch of people making mistakes, right? So it's like a whole bunch of people told me not to do drugs. I didn't listen to them, even though they were very wise in telling me not to do drugs, because I didn't trust any of their reasons for why I shouldn't do drugs. And now, you know, I'll probably tell some kid not to do drugs. He probably won't listen to me, but maybe I can be like, hey, this is the stuff that happened to me when I did drugs, and being honest about that and telling them you don't choose not to do drugs because they're dangerous. You choose not to do drugs because you don't want to live in a lie. if someone had told that to me when I was younger, maybe I would have been more open to listening to them, because
What do you mean you don't want to live in a lie? How is doing drugs living in a lie?
Because it distorts everything. And like when I took a personality test, when I took one of those Big Five personality tests, when I was smoking a lot of weed, or when I was drinking more, or when I used to drink, I don't drink anymore. I don't smoke anymore. I got different personality readings, right? Like my I would take the test when I was sober, but you know, my, what do you call it, trait neuroticism was higher, right? My extroversion was maybe higher. It's like, but that's not necessarily who I am.
Yeah, I like myself a lot more on cannabis. Like that guy is way better than this guy. As far as, at least it's how it feels on the inside. Funnier, friendlier, more out, because the way it works on me is I had one of the old school MBTI guys do that personality test on me, and he said I was an expressive introvert, and being on the cannabis kicked me over the level from introvert to extrovert. And so but it's like this far into it, they're pretty much separate people. And like having to reintegrate them into a functional self is now the fun challenge for me.
Yeah. And there's something to that, right? Because it's like, there's a lot of alcoholism in my extended family. And so for when I was younger, it was like, I'm not ever going to drink because I've seen the damage it causes to people, right? I lost an uncle when I was 10 years old. Not directly because of the alcohol, but complications related to the alcohol and the toll it took on his health. And my sister is very much like this. She's 5 years younger than me. She's never touched any drugs. She's not interested in it. And I was very much anti-alcohol for a while. And I was thinking, like, you know, that guy who's really anti-alcohol and has never had any, like, he's an annoying prick.
How do you know, man? How do you know?
Right. And so there's like, I'm not going to say that there's not, like, I needed to drink and then stop drinking. That's important for who I am and who I want to be. Because there are people in my life who knew that I drank and I like to drink, and I drank with them. But I'm also now, you know, he stopped. Maybe I could do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is this, I'm a big believer in being the example. That was really drilled into me as a kid in terms of my being the older brother. You are the example for your sister. And so, and then on top of that, I was the oldest of all of the grandchildren on my mom's side of the family. And so you are the example. Oh, like there was a long time I was running away from that too. But yeah, I've gotten to, I am the example. So let me go out and
I'm gonna be one way or the other. I guess I should steer which way it goes. Yeah.
Very true.
I
have a question for you.
Good, because I'm saying it's your turn.
Okay, cool. I saw that video the 3 or 4 minute video where you took a clip from my conversation with PBK. And it was a really weird video because there were a couple of things that you keyed in, which have been very important in my life. So like that number 33 thing, kind of the thing that pointed me, if you want to go way back with all this, that pointed me to this corner of the internet was a podcast that I started listening to. I've gone through periods where I listen to this podcast and don't. I started listening to it back in 9th grade. So this is right when podcasts were kind of getting started, called No Agenda.
Not familiar,
and
but
it's hosted by Adam Curry and John C. Dvorak. Adam Curry's the Podfather. He's been on Rogan a few times. Oh, the last time he was on, actually, he talked about how he had recently come to embrace Christ, which was not, as someone who's been listening to him for 13 years, I didn't ever really see that happening. So that was kind of cool.
I may have serendipitously watched that clip this morning. If it's the right guy. Yeah.
Blonde hair. He used to be on MTV. But yeah, so they picked up on this whole 33 thing and like how maybe like intelligence agencies are using that to signal a bunch of stuff. And so that was really weird. And then the talk about magnetic fields, like my favorite band is a band called the Magnetic Fields. And all they do is write love songs. So that was cool. Why'd you put all those things together? I like you juxtapose things in a way that's like sets off these connections and gets me thinking things, and there's weird insights that sort of like hazy insights. I don't know how to say it. It's not clear.
That's how they are for me, but like the way that one played out is the proximity to like the order I watched them. Like I watched your talk with PVK, and then I watched the I think it's Manly P. Hall, but like whoever did the video billed him as a 33-degree Mason, and like that the information therein was Masonic. And for me, the part he was saying about the magnetic fields approached it was a take on understanding non-dualism, whereas where dualism is whether or not the creator and the creation are separate, and how you were talking about those distinctions and such. 33 for me is like, because I fell in with the truth or conspiracy crowd. It was like, ooh, 33 Mason, ooh. And then at some point you realize that, or you don't, that that's also the number of vertebrae in a human spine. And if people get you scared of 33, then you're scared of your own backbone. And so like that helps.
And there's the whole Jesus was probably about 33 when he was crucified.
Yeah, it's the way my current take on Jesus is the from the angle where the word was there before creation. That like, because theoretically there's this point in the way with the planet rotation and the sun thing where it's doing this big move and then it kind of hangs for 2.5 days and then moves again. And then there's this Baba Wanyama guy on YouTube who says that the crucifixion happens within our body, that like our brain squirts something into our spine and it goes down, and if we don't waste it on the way back up, then it chills in somewhere in our brain for 2.5 days and then makes 2 glands squirt milk and honey over our pituitary. And so if Christ is a fractal for this reality, then it makes sense that he's woven through like the macro and the micro, the stars and your body and through all of life. And so then the 33 with that too. and then just giving shit to Peterson about being a Mason. What's that? It's like I got 33 degrees. You know, it's just because I don't trust him. It's I people elevate other people a lot, like even the guruship sometimes, and I have an irreverence hindrance because, as far as I know, that jackass just came out of a womb the same as me. You know, so but yeah, the real reason the video came together was because of the way the magnetic fields worked with the distinction of creation. Like things are distinct, they have their own field, but they're still inside the big one because it's all one big. And I think there's more to that sort of thing. And then that it came from where it came from made me throw the 33 stuff in. So I don't know. They come together sometimes, but there's always something there's always a through line I'm tugging on, and I don't know. Not everything I do is for me or from my understanding. It's things work through me. I don't know what side they're on, but you know, so that's that one anyway.
Okay. It reminds me of the magnetic fields talk you're talking, how the fields play into each other and they remain separate. There's a line in Gurbani where Goose says, the creator is in the creation and the creation is in the creator. So it's like a creator, creation, and then the creator again. Yeah, this looping that happens. The rats.
Yes, the Frederick, Knudsen, I want to say. His coverage. There's better covers out there, but that's the one I came across, the Mouse Utopia experiments.
Yeah, Mouse Utopia. Nim.
Those.
Do you think that's what's happening to us?
Oh, well, I don't know. My take, as far as that makes sense. The point that I think is most relevant to our society is that things really fell apart when the mothers were forced to defend the nest and could no longer rear the children properly. And similarly now, we've turned the women into men instead of mothers. And so the children aren't being reared properly. And that, I think, is the core reason our society is decaying and crumbling as fast as it is. Like the last thing any girl is raised to want to be is a mother. And like our gross domestic product is about how much we can exploit the environment. And I think we'd be way better off if the gross domestic product was like the caliber of the character of the people a place produced.
How do you quantify that, though?
Well, you know, I drive by places and they say home of this one guy who achieved something. So, like, the more of those you have per capita, I suppose, is a fair stab at it. But it's like it's not even on our radar. We're atomized and individualized. I think it's been a systematic destruction. Like, it's way easier to control you if you have no friends, if you have no family, if you have no connections. And it's easier to make you feel insufficient and sell you things. And more than the most important thing for anything in our society to be is advertiser friendly. So who's your God? And so for me, it's that. It's just that's what we're fighting against is being individualized so we're easier to control. And so that's why the Mouse Utopia jumped out at me. And then the same with that talk Peterson did with Paglia. Like we've lost washerwomen, and we've lost like they got washing machines and soap operas, and then they lost the communal wisdom of that we had when everybody had to do chores together to get by. And so there's just, and some things I don't know how replaceable they are. Can we relearn proper child rearing, or is it way too late? And do we even want to? Is like robots and rich people are all we really need now. We don't need the human labor force anymore. So
yeah,
I don't, where things are headed, where, I don't know. I just, there's stuff. I think I can do good by pointing out things I see that other people don't. And I might not be right about that, but, and that those were the big ones. It's like, it's been, normalization has been weaponized. Like I saw this kid on TikTok about how he didn't graduate college and he's living in his basement, and like at the end they're like, normalize this lifestyle. And I'm like, aha, that's exactly what you're doing. Like you're normalizing Gomorrah. Like they've pretty much normalized Sodom in this country. So
yeah.
and
Hey,
aside
you saw
from no, I didn't. But I did catch on Twitter today that CBS like replied, "We're ready to worship," to the announcement of it. So
really,
yeah, and they're installing like statues of deities in New York. It's
that yeah.
See, coming out of the truther sphere, I've understood how like things are way worse than people have any idea, and to the extent I'm able to point that out feels like a service, because it's hard when you're comfortable. And we've made everybody really comfortable. Yep. So I think if it's not too late, we're in dire times. And so to the extent I'm able to feel good about myself at all for the life I've lived is to be able to try and help now. I don't know. That's, yeah.
There is I mean, I vacillate between this all the time. There's a part of me where I'm like, especially when I was listening to No Agenda more, I was, because I started listening to them so young, I was always kind of aware that the news is just show business and a mouthpiece of propaganda.
But that awareness hasn't been baked into the boomers. Like they might be coming to it now, but like the whole time I was growing up, like we had just beaten Russia. Like we still, like when I was a child, we were in competition with Russia and winning. We were kicking their ass. Like the wall came down, but we had something to strive for as a nation. We had a reason that we were trying to be better people. Yeah, and the victory over them left us comfortable. And now look. So
well, you need a load, right? Like you need what is it? Peterson's always talking about not always, but that opponent processing thing, right? Like this kind of
something to run from and something to run toward. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's like we need that. And we definitely, when I was in the high school last year, I showed them the Rat Utopia video, the Down the Rabbit Hole one. And I asked them at the beginning of class, because it was an English class, so I would kind of just throw up these philosophical questions for them to write on for a few minutes before we got into anything. And one question was, the one before the Rat Utopia video was, are human beings just animals like any other animals, or are we something special? Because it's like, if we're just animals, like, I don't know how we avoid Rat Utopia stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Rat Utopia consequences. And I was seeing things besides the denigration of motherhood or the destruction of motherhood. The destruction of motherhood that comes about from the necessity of women having to defend themselves. And that was, I don't know if there's these weird sub-communities over in Japan, and in the late stage of the Mouse Utopia, it was talking about how some of them would go isolate themselves. And I forget the Japanese words, but there's this word that essentially means something like hermit youth. And there's these individuals who just, stay in their apartment and, they enter into the matrix, right? Either through their video games, their anime, or whatever internet thing that they want to do. And
I don't know if it's youth, but what turned into the Lobster Monkey Army notion started off as the army of the Hikikomori, and I think that's the one. Yeah.
Okay, maybe there's something about hermit in it, right? And then there's another one where one of the other consequences for the males was that they would never engage in sexual approach behavior, but they would spend all day grooming themselves.
The beautiful
ones.
There's
a subculture. Yeah. And I was like, oh, man. And you see some of this stuff around the red pill stuff, the manosphere stuff. Red pill in terms of seeing female nature as it truly is. There's some good stuff in that community, but a lot of toxic stuff too.
That's the thing.
And
yeah.
Like some of that stuff is, I don't know, at least for human beings, whether you could consider sexual approach to be sexual approach if the consequence of conception isn't actually there. So it's like, yeah, they're approaching sexually because they're trying to, hook up with these women, but not really, because after going through all this stuff and like keep taking my sexuality a lot more seriously and guarding it, and not trying to engage in any of that stuff unless it's the woman who I'm going. Like, I'm not like, unless it's my wife, right? Suddenly, my approach to how I put myself together is totally different, and I have to be a lot more responsible, stable, put together to, find a prospect, because it's supposed to be my wife, and sexual approach is actually conception approach. And it's if you're trying to engage in that with me, like, you're not actually approaching. It's just another.
It's like, I'm dildo shopping. I wasn't really looking for my son's mother. Sorry for the confusion. I was just, anybody will do. Yeah, it's a different thing.
Yeah, totally different thing.
And
I don't think that you can get the best out of people unless they're maybe that's not fair because they're like monks and nuns and stuff like that. But out of the average person, like, you're probably not going to get the best out of who that person is or what they have to offer unless they're thinking about, how am I going to put myself together to make sure I can take care of an infant, let alone someone who's going to eventually be contributing to the society. And like, I don't know, like, I see these kids in my classes and it's where maybe the parents did the thing where they got together and they really hampered down and they raising that kid together, even though it was, something that they didn't necessarily plan for.
Even though it was a surprise child.
Right. But then there's the other ones where mom's by herself. She's got to defend herself, defend the kids. And some of these, like I had a 9-year-old in the class that I was student teaching in. And it's like he came in high one day, right? And we talked to we were like, should we file a report? And there's a social worker on campus. He's like, CPS isn't going to get involved with this, like, and they probably shouldn't, right? Like, you don't want CPS. Like, it actually it's the last resort. Like, it gave me a little bit of comfort, the idea that like it's not so easy to separate a kid from their parent, even if the parent isn't.
Well, putting them into the foster system isn't necessarily better than the neglectful parent they're with right now.
Yes,
is the thing.
There are students in the foster system in the class, and I would not necessarily say they're better off. And I also teach in a jail, and I don't anymore, but I was teaching on the female side for a while, and the horror stories I heard from some of the women who were raised in the foster system. It's like, say either you're one student told me, either you're packing heat or you're walking the street. From the 8, like this lady was packing guns since she was 8. And like, that's why she's a career criminal. Because she's always,
that's what it's like where she lives.
Yeah, but it's like she had to have guns to defend herself, and because of that, she kept catching charges. Because you're 8 years old, you're not legally allowed to have a gun, right?
It's amazing how bad it is that people watching Netflix don't know. Like, you can afford a Netflix sub, you'll be fine. If you have a house with lights and internet, you're pretty safe. But
yeah,
nobody's gone around door to door saying, hey man, we need your help protecting the kids. Like, right. You sitting at home watching Netflix is fine. As far like that's adult behavior. It's like you go to work, you pay your taxes. That's really all we expect of you. Mm-hmm. And now we're here. So,
and that's why I see the solution, at least in my case, in the religious tradition that I am heir to, right? Because
there's a good view. No, seriously, that's like, there's so many people ending their gene lines. Their ancestors went through so much bullshit to get this far, and now they're like, I'm gonna cut off my dick.
Yeah, it's like, what? Like, what a slap in the face to all of your like forefathers. Oh, good Lord. There's this you know that meme, Insanity Wolf?
No.
It's a black wolf on a yellow background usually, and he's howling. It's like, you're the product of it's like 2.3 billion years of evolution. Start acting like it. And there's a lot of truth to
that. I have some trepidation about like pointing out how bad it is, because I think those of us who see the society in free fall aren't good at giving the younger ones hope. It's where is their motive to try hard when all the adults around them see the world is crumbling? And I have some qualms with my own behavior in that regard, but I don't know the level of comfort I'm trying to break through among what I see as obviously good people that don't recognize how dire the situation kind of calls me to do it. So, but I am aware that, like, that anybody going into the service of the children like yourself gets a lot of my respect, because that's not easy. And now it's legally fraught unless you're a sellout. So, I mean, way to step into your manhood, bro.
Appreciate it.
Even after all those shrooms in college. It's kind of an honor to meet you. Seriously.
That's thank you. There's, when I was talking to the high schoolers, I would ask them, how many of you guys think that the planet's going to be here in 1,000 years? I get like 1 or 2 kids raising their hand. Everyone thought the planet's toast. Like, how many of you think America's going to be here in 200 years? Less than the amount of people who think the planet's going to be here in 1,000. And I would ask, there was at one point, because I was a substitute, but so the situation was, there was an English teacher who got into the classroom. She was a new hire, and she tapped out after about 3 weeks because it was way harder than she thought it would be. And the kids just didn't have a teacher all year. And then I got in the second semester, and I was, I was going to the staff meetings, trying to get them on track with the curriculum. But I was also, like, I recognized what an opportunity I had in terms of flexibility and leeway and what we could talk about and what kind of things we could explore.
As a sub?
A little bit, yeah. And for a little bit, we just started learning about, like, I was like, let's learn about some American folk tales. Like, how many of you know who John Henry is? 3 or 4 kids in each class. And this was maybe across, so maybe like 20 kids out of 20 to 30 kids out of about 200 knew who John Henry was, knew who Johnny Appleseed was. So I was like, oh, we're just going to learn about some folk tales. And I asked them, tying it into the standards, where, one of them for like 10th graders is being able to analyze character traits. Okay, give me a positive character trait, a negative character trait, and then an American character trait for John Henry after we had just watched. And like, the most intelligent kid I had out of all the classes, this really, really bright kid. And it's like, positive and negative, that's easy. He's what the heck is an American character trait? And he had no idea. They couldn't tell me there is no sense of American identity or American character. And I don't know if that's the case everywhere, but at least in, California, as some people will call it.
That might be a complimentary way to speak of the state at this point.
But yeah, and I was like, oh snap, like, yeah, we need to learn about folk heroes. I was like, guys, these people are, and some of it is also, a lack of world experience, like, and just being young. So, I cut them some slack, but it's like all of these characters, some of the things that they have in common that, some of them are positive, some of them are negative, but like, they're all hard workers. They're all very good natured and good humored. Like, they're laughing, making jokes, singing, all of them, right? There's a respect for nature in these characters: John Henry, Johnny Appleseed, Pecos Bill, and there is a sense of a respect for nature, but also seeing nature, not so much in John Henry's case, but like seeing nature as a bit of an adversary, something that needs to be overcome. There's friendly. All these characters are very friendly and maybe simple. Most of folk heroes aren't American. We have an anti-intellectualism in America, and that's part of our character. And the idea that for them that a country could have a character was mind-boggling. And it's like, yeah, guys, this is what people used to live for, was defining the character of their society.
Wow. Well, this is actually longer than I like to do, so that's another compliment to you. Anybody who is aware of those folk heroes he just mentioned in the comment, I have no idea what their stories are. So if you could leave those down there, that would be a benefit to me. I'm so glad we did this. I hope we run into each other in other conversations, man. Oh, speaking of which, you going to Chino? Are you gonna
What's
in
up?
May? Will you be at Chino?
In May, is there a meetup in Chino?
There's things brewing, including a paintball for Jesus game.
Oh,
So,
nice.
I don't know who's confirmed
My
to
man,
be
Army
there.
for the Guru over here.
There you go. Don't bring your actual sword, guys. That's good.
Yeah.
Just paintball.
There's a saying: a Sikh soldier is called Sava Lakh. That means one Sikh soldier is worth 125,000 of any other soldier.
Well, remember that. We'll do a special round of the paintball just for you.
Yeah, I'm gonna be obliterated.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank you. This was great, Grim. I hope to do it again.
Cool.